What if you take a bunch of vitamin D and you release a ton of that and you don't have K2? Can taking a bunch of vitamin D on its own become problematic?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a condition called hypervitaminosis D. That is basically vitamin D toxicity. And when you look at the clinical pathology of what vitamin D toxicity looks like, it is exactly the same as vitamin K2 deficiency. So what happens is when you take a lot of vitamin D without K2, you are causing the release of a lot of osteocalcin and other vitamin K dependent proteins as well. And you're using up your body's any storage or any amount of vitamin K2 that your body has. Now, once you've used up your vitamin K2 and you've depleted it down to a clinically deficient level, you start to get calcification in all the areas where you don't want. So calcium starts to settle in on your soft tissues, in your arteries, in your tendons, and even in your skin, in your subdermal layers. So you start to get hypercalcification everywhere. So when you look at vitamin D toxicity is characterized by hypercalcification in the body. And that's the same thing as vitamin K2 deficiency. So what you're doing when you take a whole bunch of vitamin D without taking K2, you're causing more calcification at the end of the day than causing benefit.
Wow, that's crazy. And I've seen it. What would be some symptoms of this overcalcification that might arise from that?
So, you know, some of the noticeable things that people would see is things like increasing wrinkling, low energy status, you know, brittle nails, brittle hair. Those are things that people might notice, but you'll see changes in skin tone, skin color. But from a more scary and physiological standpoint, you get hardening of the arteries because you're basically building calcium plaques in the arteries. So what happens is, and this actually will segue into why vitamin K2 is so important for heart health as well, right? So vitamin K2 activates a very important protein called MGP. MGP stands for matrix GLA protein. MGP, its sole job is to remove calcium from arteries and veins, because when you take in calcium, calcium is just an inert compound, right? It's just metal. It's just flowing around in the body. Calcium doesn't do anything on its own. It requires other actions from your body to put the calcium in the right place and form bones and things like that. So when you take calcium, you got a lot of calcium circling around in your circulatory system. If the calcium is not being utilized properly, it basically starts settling in your soft tissue. And MGP's role, which is required activation by K2, is to take calcium that's settling in your arteries and remove it. And what you find is when you have a deficiency in vitamin K2 and you start developing calcified plaques in the arteries, you actually find that it's not just a plaque, you're actually building bone in the arteries. So the calcium—
That's not good.
Yeah, it's actually the osteoclastic activity, which means your arteries are turning into bones. You actually can see the honeycomb structure of your bone building in the lining of the arteries, and it's MGP's responsibility for preventing that from happening. And MGP is vitamin K2 dependent, and that's why vitamin K2 becomes so important for heart health. Now, this was demonstrated in a number of studies, but one of the biggest ones is something called the Rotterdam study. It is a 4,800 patient study over 10 years. So they followed 4,800 patients in Rotterdam over a 10-year period, and they divided them into groups of people that did not consume any K2 at all, or people that consumed even minimal levels of K2. So in the group that consumed even minimal levels of K2, they had over 50% less cardiovascular mortality. So cardiovascular mortality was cut in half just by consuming a small amount of K2. And that's profound. I mean, there's nothing out there in the market today, whether pharmaceutical, surgical, or anything, that can reduce your risk of cardiovascular mortality in half. So that's why K2 becomes extremely important now for heart health as well. So the other problem with taking too much D without K2 is you're putting your heart and your arteries in danger as well. Another study, and the calcium plays a role into that as well, right? So people take a lot of calcium. Everyone's doctor is going to tell them take 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day. When we get actually quite a bit of calcium in most of the foods we eat, so we really don't need to supplement calcium much. But a study out of the British Journal of Medicine that was a multi-year study published in 2012 showed that in postmenopausal and perimenopausal women who are taking calcium as a supplement, which is a target group for calcium supplementation, for every 1 incidence of osteoporosis that it helps, it creates 2 cases of heart disease. So it almost doubles your chance of developing heart disease as a perimenopausal or postmenopausal woman if you're taking calcium supplementation without vitamin K2 and without D3 and other supportive ingredients as well. So it becomes extremely important for those 2 areas.